How's it going, everybody? In this video, something that we really need to understand about a VMware deployment, regardless of how we're going to be administrating the VMware environment, is understanding vSphere. Especially if you're going to be managing a solution from vCenter Server, but you've always done it from vSphere. I find myself jumping back and forth between the two, regardless of the size of the environment, because that's just how I am. I like to be familiar with both and to know how to navigate and work with both. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, because there's going to be scenarios and customers that you're going to work with that are probably going to have a mixed bag, where the majority of their ESXi hosts will be inside of vCenter, but there might be some smaller branch offices that are just way too small to run multiple ESXi hosts, so you might only log in with vSphere for a single ESXi deployment. So let's go ahead and take a look at vSphere. Now this is already on our deployed ESXi host that we just did, so I'm going to walk you through basically just a user interface walkthrough, so you understand where things are at and how to kind of interact with some of the stuff. It's not going to be a deep dive, because guess what? We're going to be using this user interface to basically get ESXi host 1 basically configured, right? And then we're going to mimic host 2 and host 3, and then we're going to, well, we'll do host 2, and then host 3 will be a brand new deployment. We're going to go ahead and get host 3 completely deployed from vCenter Server, so you guys can see both sides of the coin. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so here I'm logged in. And what we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at the navigator option. So from the host, this is just going to give you some quick snapshot understanding of what's going on. So you have Get vCenter Server, which if you were to click on this, it would actually take you to VMware.com to try to download vCenter Server, which we don't need since we already have it. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that out. If we wanted to register or create a VM, we could do that if we wanted to add one if we don't already have it. Creating a VM is pretty simple, right? You're going to create a VM that isn't already working. If you click on register and create a VM, you can deploy a new virtual machine that hasn't already been created. You can deploy a virtual machine that was created and then removed from an ESXi host as a OVA or an OVF. We'll talk about a lot of this more advanced stuff when we get into vCenter. And then register an existing virtual machine. What is this one? This is the one that most people aren't familiar with. If you have a VM that was attached to host 1 on, say, shared storage, and then you want to take that VM and you want to move it to host 2, I would like to reference this as poor man's vMotion, where you're not leveraging vCenter to move the data between the hosts or move the compute resources, so the CPU and the RAM. I can take a VM, I can power it down, I can unregister from a host, go over to another host that's got access to that VM through shared storage like iSCSI or NFS or through vSAN, and I can re-register it to that other host by simply going to register a VM, looking for the data store, diving into the data store, finding the VM, clicking on the VMX file, click register, and boom, now it's associated to that new host. Very, very cool stuff when it comes to how that works. You have shutdown, where you can shut down the host. If you want to reboot the host, you can do that here as well. If you want to refresh any of the settings that are going on, feel free to refresh it. Something like that. Pretty simple stuff. We have actions where pretty much anywhere you click inside of here, these will be the options available to you. If you click over here, you can it basically gives you the same pop-up. So anywhere you click inside of here, it's going to basically work the same way. From a hardware perspective, we can see that it's VMware. The model is 7,1. Not sure why it says that, but it does. The CPU, we've got 4 CPU Intel E2620s, 2 gigahertz, 16 gigs of RAM, no persistent memory. Persistent memory is another memory type that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But basically, you've got a couple different memory types. When we talk memory, we're talking storage. So you've got physical spinning disk, mechanical hard drive, you've got your SSD, and you've got persistent memory. Persistent memory kind of sits between SSD and spinning disk. It's a little bit different than those two. We have virtual flash networking. Our host name is virthost1.lab.local. On our VM kernel 0, we have 10.255 1.22. You can have multiple VM kernel adapters, which we will have in a later video. We have one DNS server deployed. Our default gateway IPv6 is enabled. If we want to turn it off, we can, but we have to reboot the server. We have 7 adapters. Currently, we're attached to VM Network, which is our default port group for any of the VMs that we're going to create and give them internet access, or I should say network capabilities. Storage, we have 3 adapters. with data store, we have one data storage is 100 gigs. When you see 3 physical adapters, this just means, if we click on storage real quick, that there are 3 adapters on the adapters right here. You have VMHBA 0, 1, and 4. Or I'm sorry, 64. This right here is going to be our para-virtualized SCSI controller, which is going to be our basically our 100 gig hard drive, and then we have these other 2 here if we need them. Right now we don't. And if we look over here on the right hand side, we can see CPU we're setting at 1%. We got 8 gigahertz, we're using about 1% of that. Memory, we've got 16 gigs. Capacity, about 1.5 gigs is used for the operation of ESXi. And for storage, we're using about 1.5 gigs of storage. We've got about 90 something gigs free. But you might be like, well, that's still missing 10 gigs. Well, that's because there's some consumption used for that. If we click back on storage, and then we go to data stores, extent 0, if we click on this guy, here it is. So we can see that the EFI system is 3 megs, about 4 basic data, some other information. It basically breaks down what each one of these is. If we come over here, it expands out what it's doing, how much it's taking up, 3 blocks, so on and so forth. So if you want to get a real deep dive into the partition of how ESXi is installed, guess what? You can do that if you'd like. But we're not going to dive quite that deep into it, at least not right now anyway. So that's it for the overview of the host. I mean, you got the image profile that we're using. HA is not turned on. vMotion is supported but not turned on. And then you have some other details. It's basically saying that it's 2 in the morning on Wednesday. It's not that time at all. We can configure NTP and all that type of stuff, the utilization over time. Then if we come up here to manage, we can see some details, advanced settings. If we want to modify any of the variables, we can do that. If we want to turn a VM on when it boots up, after the host boots up, I should say, we can turn on auto start. This is good for certain things. Like, for example, my home network, I run a voice over IP environment where what I do is I go ahead and deploy 3 Cisco 9971 IP phones that connect into my CUCM server. So if my server that is running CUCM powers off for whatever reason, power or otherwise, when the server boots back up, one of the first things it's going to do is it's going to boot up CUCM. Once it boots up CUCM, CUCM comes online, and then it boots up, and eventually my phone's register. So you can turn on, edit settings, you can come in here and turn this on and say power, you can, sorry, so we turned it on, and then you can basically grab the VM and then set it to enabled and then all that good stuff. If you want to change where the swap location is, you can do that as well, but we're not going to mess with that. Time and date. If you want to change the time, because this is not accurate, obviously, we can go ahead and change that. So in order to fix that, let's go ahead and just do this real quick. We're going to type in here NTP server, and we're going to click on ntppool.org. I'm going to go ahead and grab North America, and I will grab these 4 hosts right there. I'm going to have to remove the word server and the space between the number and server. I'm going to copy that back over here. I'm going to go to Actions. I'm going to go to NTP Service. I'm going to go ahead and click on Start, but it's going to say you can't start. It failed. So it's because we have to configure it. So we're going to go to Edit Settings. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say Start and Stop with Host. I'm coming down here, space, and then enter these guys in. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the server word from all these guys and just delete that. So we have all the servers laid out, and get all that laid in here like so. And then same thing, server 3, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and say click on save. If you have a NTP server deployed, then that will allow you to go ahead and do it. The NTP servers is stopped. I'm going to go to start or actions, NTP service policy. I'm going to say start and stop with host. I'm going to click on start, and now it should start pretty easily. Go ahead, there it goes. It started. You have to configure a pool or an NTP server, first and foremost. And so I'll give that some time. Eventually it will catch up and it will be the right time. Right now it's UTC. So I believe if I go back to edit settings, yeah, those will sync up and we'll be in good time. Right now I'm not very worried about it. If I was to click on the command prompt and say paste, I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy and come back to here and ping. If that responds, then we know we're in good shape. But apparently it doesn't want to ping. So if I do this, let's go up here and do a quick .2, and that responds. So as soon as it gets a response from an NTP server, it'll go ahead and start to sync up the time and all that good stuff. Hardware, we have some of our devices that are here that we can play with if we wanted to mess around with this. I don't ever mess with this. A lot of these options aren't even available for us to mess with. From power management, if we wanted to change the policy, we could say high performance. If we want to mess around with it, we can. I never really do this. From a licensing perspective, if you have a license from VMware, you can assign it here. So to do that, you would go to assign license. You would plug in here the license file that you have, and then you would say check license. So you go ahead and grab a license real quick. Go ahead and grab this guy. I believe this is a license that will work. I'll edit it so you guys won't be able to see it. I'm going to go say check license. And good. So now we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and it said, yep, it's available. I'm going to go ahead and click on assign license. And so now it's telling me that my license is good until September 29th of 2021. Now, if I want to remove a license, I can just click on remove the selected license. Packages. If you want to install any updates, this is how you would do that. So pretty cool stuff here in terms of the operations. You can monkey around with any of this stuff. You can click on the install the update if you want to, but I'm not going to mess with that. We'll talk about that with the update manager at a later point in time. So if I want to manage this device, I can. If I wanted to configure SNMP, I can click on this guy right here, for example. I can go ahead and say actions, and I can say start. Let's see if it gives me a hard time. If it started, it failed. So I would have to, I think there's a process that has to be done in the background. Start manually. Go ahead and close that out. I don't believe it's going to work. I'll have to, I'm not sure exactly why it's failing, but there is a reason behind it. But if you want to turn on SSH, for example, you can click on here and you can go to actions and say start, and then SSH is now turned on. Now here's the cool thing about this. If I go to back to the host, go ahead and click on dismiss right there. Click on back on the host, you'll get this little pop-up warning that says, hey, SSH is enabled on the host. So you get it warns you when there's a problem or when there's a potential issue. And then when you come down here to security and users, if I want to acceptance level, when it comes to this is going to be like updates and things like that, you can go to edit settings and you can say, you know, what level of updates are you going to accept. So they're signed based off of what they are. We'll talk about that more when we get into update manager. Authentication. If I wanted to enable AD, I could enable AD. We'll take a look at that at a later point in time. If I wanted to install certificates, I could install a certificate. If I wanted to add users, then other than root, I could add users. If I wanted to add a role, so let's say I want to create a user for NOC or system support or help desk or whatever it might be, I have to give whatever users I create, I have to give them an administrator role. And you can dictate what that particular role does when you're playing around with it. Lockdown mode, if you want to prevent somebody from being able to access the server from the DC UI, this is what basically would be done. Right now it's disabled. On the monitor tab, this one's pretty obvious. You can monitor all the different capabilities of the server. So if you're on performance or hardware, you can see what's going on. Events, what's happening. We can see SSH was turned on. If we want to see that, what tasks were executed, we can see that ESXi was successfully installed. If we want to look at the logs, we can see what's going on the server. And if we want to look at any notifications, we can see that from here. It says SSH is enabled. So that's pretty much it. There's really not a whole lot from there that we need to be worried about or concern ourselves with. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen. That's a high-level overview of how this is going to work. And hopefully sooner than later, we will get our NTP will be up to date. We can go back and just double check on the Manage tab. We can come down here to System, and then we can click on Time and Date. And if we do a refresh, it's still working. So we're at least on Tuesday. We're working our way backwards, which is good. So we need to be on 3.1 at about 9 o'clock at night. We're not quite there yet. So once we get there, we'll be in good shape. Even though this is actually out of date right here. This server's got the wrong time. Well, you can actually go to Properties. Actually, no, we go here and we'll change the date and time because that's actually the wrong. Adjust date and time. So we're going to say this is actually the 1st. And we click on OK. Change the date, and the time is actually 9. And we're going to say this one here is going to be, we'll say 22. Click on OK. There we go. That's better. All right. So now that that's done, that, ladies and gentlemen, is it for our vSphere overview of and introduction as to how it works and all the good stuff that goes into that. Until next time, guys, thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll catch all of you guys in the next video.